my son's college graduation, I sat in the back row of that auditorium while he stood at the podium and told 2,000 people that his success belonged to everyone except me. He thanked his professors, his mentor, his fiance's family, even his freshman roommate. Then he looked out at the crowd, smiled that smile I'd watched grow from a gap-toothed 6-year-old's grin into something polished and expensive, and sat down. When he finally found me in the crowd after the ceremony, he said quietly, so no one else could hear, "Dad, maybe don't stand too close in the photos. Gerald's parents are here." I left the auditorium without saying a word, but when my son opened the envelope I left on his chair, his whole world came apart. I should start at the beginning, because the end won't make sense without it. My name is Thomas Garrett. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years driving a delivery truck for a regional logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job that impresses anyone at a graduation party. I wore uniform 5 days a week, ate lunch in the cab of a truck, and came home every night smelling like diesel and cardboard. My wife Patricia passed from ovarian cancer 11 years ago when our son Nathan was 19 and just starting his sophomore year at Ohio State. After she died, it was just the two of us. I want to be careful here because I'm not a man who enjoys self-pity. Patricia used to say that about me. "Tommy, you'd rather bleed out quietly than let anyone bring you a bandage." She wasn't wrong. So I'm not telling you this story because I want sympathy. I'm telling it because some things need to be said plainly, and I've spent too many years keeping my mouth shut. Nathan was a good kid. I mean that. Before all of this, before the fiancé and the MBA program and the people whose opinions apparently mattered more than mine, he was a good, ordinary kid who made decent grades and liked baseball and called me every Sunday. After Patricia died, we got closer for a while. He'd come home on breaks and we'd watch football and order pizza and talk about her. Those are the years I go back to sometimes, when I'm trying to remember who he was before money changed the shape of his face. He graduated from Ohio State with a business degree, got a decent entry-level job at a marketing firm in Columbus, and met a woman named Vanessa at some industry networking event 2 years later. Vanessa was fine. She was sharp, ambitious, came from a family in Westerville with a big house and a father named Gerald, who had built a commercial real estate portfolio over 30 years and apparently had opinions about everything, including his future son-in-law's family. I met Gerald Monroe at Nathan and Vanessa's engagement dinner. He shook my hand with the specific grip of a man who has decided before meeting you that you don't quite measure up, looked at my sport coat, and said, "Nathan tells me you drove trucks. That's honest work." The way he said it, you'd think honest work was a minor character flaw. I drove home from that dinner with the windows down even though it was 40 degrees because I needed the cold air to think straight. Over the next 18 months, while Nathan and Vanessa planned their wedding and Nathan enrolled in an evening MBA program that Gerald was co-funding, I watched something happen that I still have trouble describing. It wasn't one moment. It was 100 small ones. Nathan stopped calling on Sundays. When I called him, the conversations got shorter, more distracted, full of long pauses where I could hear Vanessa in the background. He stopped coming home for the holidays, the Christmas after the engagement. "Gerald does this big thing at their place, Dad. It's easier if we just do it there." Easier. That word again. I started noticing the way he introduced me at the few family events I was included in. "This is my dad. He's retired now." I wasn't retired. I was still driving 3 days a week, just scaled back. But retired sounded better than still in the truck at 62. I let it go the first time, and the second. By the third time, it had already become the official version. The MBA graduation was in May at a rented convention center ballroom in downtown Columbus. Nathan had been in the program for 2 years, evenings and weekends, and he'd worked hard at it. I'll give him that. I drove up from Zanesville, where I'd moved after selling the Columbus house 4 years earlier to cover some medical debt from Patricia's last round of treatment. I wore the same dark suit I'd worn to her funeral and to Nathan's undergraduate graduation, and to every significant moment of the last decade. It still fit. I'd had it cleaned and pressed. The event was crowded and loud, and everyone seemed to know each other. Gerald and Vanessa's mother Barbara were already seated in the reserved family section when I arrived. They were name placards. Mine was in the row behind theirs, at the end, near the aisle. I didn't say anything about it. I sat down, straightened my tie, and waited. Nathan gave the student address. He'd been selected by his cohort, and he'd clearly practiced it. He was composed and funny, and spoke about resilience and opportunity, and the people who had shaped him. He thanked his professors by name. He thanked his extraordinary support system, which included Vanessa, her family, his classmates, and his mentor, a man named Dr. Calloway, who apparently changed the entire direction of his thinking about leadership. He did not mention me. I sat in my folding chair and listened to my son speak for 12 minutes to a ballroom full of people, and I counted the seconds after support system, where my name could have gone. There were plenty of them. Afterward, in the lobby, he found me while Gerald and Barbara were talking to the program director. He looked genuinely pleased with himself, which I understood, and for a moment I thought we might just have a normal exchange, the kind fathers and sons have, where someone says, "I'm proud of you," and means it. "Great speech," I said. "Thanks, Dad. Hey, listen." He glanced over his shoulder toward Gerald. "Gerald's got this photographer doing family portraits before the reception. It's going to be the four of us, me, Vanessa, her parents, just keeping it simple." He paused. "You understand?" I looked at him for a long moment. The lobby was very loud. Someone nearby was laughing at something. "Sure," I said. "You'll come to the reception, though. There's a table near the back with some of my classmates' families. You'll be fine there." He was already moving away before I finished nodding. I went back to the ballroom, which was being rearranged for the reception. My chair was still there with the suit jacket I'd folded over the back of it and the card I'd brought. The card was inside a plain white envelope with Nathan's name written on it in my handwriting. I'd been carrying it in my jacket pocket since that morning. I set the envelope on his chair. Then I picked up my jacket, walked to the parking garage, and drove back to Zanesville. The drive was 2 hours. I stopped once for gas and a coffee and sat in the parking lot of a Shell station for about 15 minutes, just staring at the windshield. I'm not a man who cries easily, but I'll admit the back of my throat ached in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would have said. She had a way of being clear about things without being cruel, and I couldn't decide whether she would have been more heartbroken or more furious. I decided probably both, in equal measure, which was usually how she operated. My phone didn't ring until 9:17 that night. "Dad." Nathan's voice was different than it had been in the lobby. The smooth MBA program confidence was gone. "What is this?" "It's a card," I said. "This isn't a card, Dad." A pause. I could hear him breathing. "Where did you get all of this?" "I kept records," I said. "Patricia did, mostly. She was better organized than me." "You can't—" He stopped. Started again. "Why would you do this?" "I thought you should have the full picture," I said, "since we're celebrating achievements." I heard him put the phone down for a moment, or maybe press it against his chest. When he came back, he sounded younger, more like the kid who used to call me on Sundays. "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't mention you in the speech." "I know," I said. "That wasn't, with Gerald there and the way everything is with Vanessa's family, I didn't want to make it weird." "I know," I said again. "So why the letter?" "Because you needed to know," I said, "and because I'm done pretending I'm not your father because it's inconvenient for the room you're standing in." I let him sit with that. He called back 4 more times that night. I answered the last one. "But I need to tell you what was in the envelope because otherwise none of that means anything." I need to go back about a year. Nathan and Vanessa had been engaged for about 8 months when he called me one evening. That particular kind of call where you can tell from the first sentence that there's something he's building up to. We talked about nothing for 10 minutes. The weather, the Buckeyes, how the apartment in Columbus was working out. Then, finally, "So Vanessa and I have been looking at venues." "For the wedding?" "Yeah. And, we wanted to have a conversation with you about contributing." I remember I was standing in my kitchen, and I turned off the burner under the soup I was making, because I wanted to hear this clearly. He gave me the number, not a hard ask, not aggressive, just matter of fact the way he'd gotten with money since spending time with Gerald. $15,000. That was what he thought I could probably manage, toward a wedding that, it turned out, was budgeted at around $85,000 total, with Gerald covering the rest. I want you to understand what $15,000 means on a logistics driver's pension and Social Security. I had about $22,000 in savings at the time. That account had taken me the better part of a decade to build, interrupted by Patricia's medical bills, by the cost of moving, by the year I had a bad back and couldn't drive and lived off savings for 6 months. $22,000 was not a cushion. It was a raft. I'll see what I can do, I told him. Gerald's contributing 60, Nathan said, not as a comparison, just as information, and the information landed exactly the way he knew it would. I spent 3 weeks looking at my accounts, calculating, reading the fine print on my pension arrangement, considering whether I could pick up extra shifts. In the end, I transferred $12,000 to Nathan's account, everything I could responsibly move without leaving myself completely exposed. I didn't tell him it was almost everything. I just sent it. His response was a text. "Thanks, Dad. Really appreciate it." That was in October. By February, I was no longer included in venue walkthroughs. By March, when I called to ask about the rehearsal dinner schedule, Nathan mentioned that Gerald had offered to host it at his club and had kind of taken over the logistics. I asked if I was still expected to give a toast at the reception. "We'll see how the evening flows," Nathan said. "It might be kind of long if everyone does one." Everyone. I was everyone now. The wedding was in June, a year before the MBA graduation. It was at a vineyard outside Columbus, the kind of place that charges you for the view. Gerald and Barbara were everywhere, gracious and expansive and clearly in their element. I sat at a table with some of Nathan and Vanessa's college friends and their spouses, people I didn't know, who were perfectly nice and clearly had no idea who I was beyond Nathan's father from somewhere downstate. There was no toast from me. At the end of the night, after the dancing, and the cake and the photographer who kept finding beautiful ways to arrange Nathan and Vanessa and Gerald and Barbara into family portraits, I found Nathan near the exit to say goodnight. He hugged me. A short hug, the kind you give an acquaintance. "Great night," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Congratulations, son." He was already looking over my shoulder for Vanessa when I walked away. So that's the context. That's what the $12,000 came from, and what it bought, and what the 18 months between the wedding and the MBA graduation looked like. Now here's what was in the envelope. The card itself was simple. Just a white card, the kind you get at any drugstore. On the inside, in my handwriting, I had written, "Nathan, everything I gave freely and without condition. But tonight I think you should know what it cost. I love you. Dad." Behind the card were 4 sheets of paper folded together. The first sheet was a summary. 31 years of financial support, listed in categories. College tuition contributions, room and board supplements when his financial aid fell short. The car I bought him at 19 so he could get to his campus job. The medical insurance I kept him on until the law required it, and then paid out of pocket for 2 years after because his early jobs didn't have good coverage. The deposit on his first apartment, which he paid back half of, and I told him to forget the rest. The suit I bought him for his first real job interview. The second sheet was the $12,000 I'd sent for the wedding. Not as a grievance, just as a number. Printed out from my bank statement. Transferred to his account. Acknowledged by one text message. The third sheet was harder to put together. It took me about a month of going through Patricia's files. She had kept records of everything, her medical bills, our insurance claims, letters from the hospital. After she died, while Nathan was finishing his sophomore year, I had taken out a personal loan to cover $6,200 in final medical expenses that insurance didn't touch, because I didn't want those bills to become a shadow over Nathan finishing school. I had paid that loan off over 3 years without telling him. The third sheet was the loan paperwork and the final payoff confirmation. The fourth sheet was just a note I wrote. It said, "I am not giving you this to make you feel guilty. I'm giving it to you because tonight you stood in front of everyone who matters in your life, and you said thank you to all of them. I watched you do it. I was in the back row, which is where you put me, and I watched you thank 11 people by name, and I understood finally that this is who we are now. So I want you to have the complete picture of who paid for the early chapters, since you're the one writing the ending. I love you, Nathan. I always will. But I am done making myself smaller so you can seem larger. Tonight was the last time. I didn't put a dollar total at the bottom. I thought about it. The numbers are significant. But I decided that wasn't the point. The point was the look on his face at 19 when I told him his mother was gone and then handed him a check for the fall semester anyway, because I wanted one thing in his life to stay steady. The point was the Sunday calls. The point was the Sunday calls. The point was the suit. He called 4 times before I answered. I've already told you that part. What I haven't told you is what he said on the last call, and what I said back, and why that exchange changed things. I didn't know about the loan, he said. The hospital loan. Mom never told me. She wouldn't have, I said. Neither would I, normally. Dad. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight, I told him. It's late. You've got a lot to think about. Gerald. He started and then stopped. What about Gerald? He makes it easy to want to be like him, Nathan said. I don't know how to explain that. He takes up a lot of space. And I guess I started thinking that was what I was supposed to be. You can admire Gerald, I said. That's fine. But I'm your father, Nathan, not a problem to manage. He didn't say anything. I listened to the silence on the line the way you listen for something you're not sure is there. I put you in the back row, he finally said. Yes, I said. At my own graduation, and at the wedding, and out of the photos, and off the speech. He made a sound I hadn't heard from him in years, low and private. The kind of sound that belongs to a person who has just understood something that can't be taken back. I recognized it because I had made the same sound twice in my life. Once when the doctor told us about Patricia, and once in the parking lot of a Shell station on Route 22 with a gas station coffee going cold in my hand. I didn't try to fill the silence. Patricia always said I was bad at that, at letting silence do its work. But that night I let it run. I'm going to fix this, he said eventually. I know you'll try, I said. And I meant it. Because I wasn't done with him. I was done with the version of him he'd been performing for Gerald Monroe's benefit, but not with the boy who called me every Sunday, or the young man who sat in the hospital parking lot with me for 2 hours after they told us his mother wouldn't make it to Christmas. Can I come to Zanesville this weekend? He asked. I'll make soup, I said. We don't talk about that night often. He came that Saturday, just him, without Vanessa, and we sat in my kitchen and he read through all 4 sheets again slowly, this time out loud, which was his idea and which I think was his way of making it real. He didn't try to explain everything away. He just sat with it. That was new. I don't know exactly what happened between him and Gerald after that. I know that Nathan and Vanessa moved to a smaller apartment the following fall, closer to my part of the state, and that at Thanksgiving that year, he introduced me to people as my dad, Thomas, the hardest working man I know. I don't know if Vanessa coached him on that or if it came from him. Either way, I accepted it without making a thing of it. What I know is this. There are men who measure a father by his bank account, and there are men who figure out eventually what that kind of measuring costs them. Nathan was the second kind. It took him longer than it should have, but the soup was hot when he arrived, and he stayed until nearly midnight, and when he left, he hugged me the right way, the long way, the kind that means something. I drove Patricia's photo to the dining room table that weekend and left it out where I could see it while we talked. I can't explain why. It just felt like she should be in the room for it. Some things you have to say plainly, even when it's hard, even when the timing is terrible, even when you're sitting in the back row of your own son's graduation, trying to make yourself small enough not to embarrass anyone. Some truths can't wait for a convenient moment. I was 63 years old when I finally stopped waiting. I've been sitting with this long enough now that the sharp edges have worn down some, but the shape of it is still there. The night Nathan called me back, the 4th call, the one I answered. I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard since he was 19. and standing in a hospital corridor, something cracked open, and I thought a lot about what it takes to get to that place, for both of us. Here's what I believe, and I believe it the way you believe things you learned the hard way rather than the easy way. How a person treats someone who can do nothing for them anymore tells you everything about who they actually are, not who they're trying to become, not the version they perform for people like Gerald Monroe. Who they are. Nathan had gotten very good at performing. The MBA program, the right apartment, the right in-laws, the careful way he introduced me as retired when I was still driving 3 days a week, none of that was Nathan. That was Nathan deciding that the life he came from was a liability instead of a foundation. What I had to do, what the envelope forced both of us to do, was name the thing that had been sitting in the room with us for 2 years without either of us saying it out loud. Silence is not the same as peace. I had confused the two for a long time, and I think Nathan had too. Real decency, the kind that holds up when it's tested, doesn't come from knowing the right things to say at a networking event. It comes from being honest even when honesty is inconvenient, even when the room you're standing in would prefer a cleaner story. The 4 sheets of paper I folded into that envelope weren't an attack. They were a mirror. I needed Nathan to look at the actual record of what had passed between us, not the version where I was simply the modest father from downstate who understood his limitations. I had understood very little about my own limits, it turned out. I had let myself be managed and minimized and seated in the back row, because I told myself that was love. It wasn't. It was fear dressed up as patience. What I know now, at 63, having buried a wife and raised a son mostly alone and driven more miles than I can count thinking about both of them. What I know is that real strength isn't the kind that makes noise. It's the kind that keeps a 3-year loan secret so your son can finish his sophomore year without a cloud over it. It's the kind that shows up to a graduation in a pressed suit and sits in the assigned seat without complaint, right up until the moment it quietly refuses to anymore. You can be steady and self-possessed and still have a line. Finding that line, knowing where it is, and being willing to stand at it, that took me longer than it should have. And the thinking part, the part where you ask yourself what's actually true versus what's comfortable, that's the work nobody does for you. Nathan had to do that work the night he read those 4 sheets. I had to do it every time I almost called him to ask for less than I deserved, and stopped myself. Understanding your own situation clearly, without the distortion of what you wish were true, is harder than any long shift I ever drove. Patricia would have gotten there faster. She always did, but she left the job to me, and I finished it the only way I knew how. Late, imperfect, and with soup on the stove when he finally came through the door. That's enough. It has to be.